So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new media and American League Baseball capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. In the words of the long-forgotten and much, well, nobody remembers them anyway, musical group Max Damian, rah-rah-ree, kick him in the knee, rah-rah-ras, kick him in the other knee. Well, that's the only cheer I ever learned, and that was from the disco era of 1978 down in Miami. So excuse me if the world of cheerleading is a little outside of my usual comfort zone. But to help me out, I'm going to be joined momentarily by Jane Torgovnick, author of Cheer, Inside the Secret World of College Cheerleaders. Jane, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hi, it's actually Kate. How are you doing?
Kate, did I say Kate? I'm sorry.
I used to work at Jane Magazine. It's completely understandable.
Oh, my God. That's so embarrassing. I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you very much for having me on tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And thanks for putting up with my ineptitude. I don't know why I did that, because we've been corresponding, and I knew that, but I guess I kept seeing Kate Magazine, and I'm interviewing Jane.
Exactly. You know. Kate Magazine someday, maybe. We'll see.
You know, it's funny. The worst mistake I ever made as a reporter was, like, in the first month, I was a writer for the St. Petersburg Times as a kid out of college, and they sent me out to interview this guy who had been on a game show. You know, local guy gets on a game show, wins some money. And I remember I went out and talked to him, and he kept telling me that this X was his real name, but on the show he went by this other name. And I was nervous because I hadn't really done much of this before, and I talked to him and wrote the story. And the next day, I think I had his real first name and his fake last name put together.
You sort of combined the two?
Yeah, and, you know, good luck explaining that to your boss, right?
Oh, yeah, always fun.
Well, so, Kate, the hardest thing for me to believe in this book is that you were never a cheerleader and you never went to a football game. Now, what's wrong with this picture?
It's actually, I think most people I went to high school with would laugh pretty hard when they find out I wrote a book about college cheerleading, because I was not only did I not go to football games, I was very animately opposed to going to football games. The only time I ever went once was when my friend was streaking during halftime, and the only reason I went was to be in the getaway car.
You were driving?
I was in the passenger seat of the getaway car.
Oh, so you were encouraging a fugitive. That's really sad.
Yes, maybe I'll get arrested now.
Now, before we talk about any more cheerleading, are there any other criminal acts you'd like to cop to now while we have the authorities on the line?
I think that's pretty much about it.
Okay. So, knowing that, and clearly a lack of interest in this stuff, why commit a year of your adult life to studying the exercise, eating, drugging, and sexual habits of cheerleaders, of all things?
Well, here's sort of how it happened. I was working at Jane Magazine at the time, and I got a story assignment. It was sort of like, Kate, we'd like you to cover this story and see if there's anything we can do about cheerleaders, college cheerleaders specifically. And so I started just making lots of phone calls, and I started on Friendster was actually the big site at the time. So I started on Friendster trying to find cheerleaders. And as I started talking to people, they were just telling me about a sport I didn't even realize existed. They were telling me about going to tryouts and being up against 150 other women for 2 spots on a cheerleading team. And they were telling me about these brutal practices, and they'd sort of rattle off lists of injuries. They'd be like, yeah, I broke my thumb, I got 2 concussions, I cracked a rib, I got a black eye. And it was just this very intense thing they were describing, and I just had no idea that's what cheerleading was. And so after talking to a few people, I went back to my editors and was like, I really think there's a great story here about sort of all the different ways this is a very intense world. And they said, great, go to College Cheerleading Nationals. And next thing I knew, I was on a plane to Daytona Beach, Florida. And Nationals is sort of, it's extremely surreal. You're surrounded by cheerleaders all day, all types of uniforms. Some of the teams will sort of, get cornrows in their hair together, or they'll wear pink all weekend. And again, I was just sort of blown away by the athleticism And I think even more than that, the passion. Cheerleaders love what they do. They will spend every second out on the lawn stunning that whole weekend because this is just what they absolutely love. And I think I was really drawn in by that.
Are they interesting people to talk to? I mean, I think back to high school and college, and I don't know, generally not the people that I would be going out of my way to chat with, because they didn't really seem to have a lot to offer in the way of conversation.
Oh my goodness, everyone in my book I find just absolutely fascinating, and they're actually so fun to talk to and hang out with. And you know, I'm a few years older, and I obviously come from a very different background, and I actually think that was even better because we sort of had this like sort of mutual getting to know each other and what each other's worlds were about sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the people in this book aren't at all who you expect. There's one girl named Cassie who what she wants to do after college is start a tattoo parlor. There's, another girl named Marley who is at Stephen F. Austin University in Texas, and she's doing her school's ROTC program. And I went with her to many of her 5 a.m. runs with her ROTC class. And they're just not at all the people you think. And another thing that really surprised me is a lot of them are guys. At the college level, about 50% of cheerleaders are actually men. And most of them came out of football, basketball, baseball, and they sort of bring with it this sort of intense competitiveness. So no one in this book was all who I expected. That said, there is one girl who did beauty pageants. There's one girl who is a child actress, but hugely, hugely, hugely varying people in this book.
Well, folks, if you've got a comment or question for Kate Torgovnick, author of Cheer, Inside the Secret World of College Cheerleaders, give us a call, 1-646-595-3135. You can also check out her website, www.cheerthebook.com. That's all solid, Cheer the Book. Now, believe it or not, before I even gave out the number, we've got a call for you, so let's go to the phones. Hi, do you have a comment or question for Kate?
Hello?
Hi.
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 Hi. Some big question.
Okay.
That was a great question.
Oh my God! That's the thing about having open phones. You don't really know. So, tell me this: how did you convince the schools and the cheerleaders, or maybe you just had to convince the schools to give you access?
Yeah, what I did is I started with the cheerleading coaches. So I'd write or call the coach, sort of tell them about who I am, send them some articles I'd written, and tell them about this book I wanted to write. And I mean, I told them that I really want this to be a story, like almost a Friday Night Lights for cheerleaders, where I'm going to follow you, I'm going to be around all the time, all year, and just sort of tell the story as it unfolds. So I start with the coaches, and when I was sort of doing this process, the week before I started making calls to coaches, the Duke lacrosse scandal broke. Oh. And I think if I had had the foresight to start even just a little bit earlier, I would have had such better luck, because what would happen is I'd have a coach who was so excited, like, yes, we want to be part of this. This sounds great. And then they'd go to their administration who would say, no, absolutely not. No reporters on campus. Forget about it. No way. And then I'd be back to square one. And not exaggerating, I probably went through 20 to 25 schools that way. So I am so grateful to Stephen F. Austin University for being the first one to let me in. And they were actually one of the first schools I wanted, because they're just cheerleading machines. At the year I followed them, they just won 4 national titles. They attracted cheerleaders from Boston, California, all over the country. People came to this tryout that I was at in East Texas, 2 hours away from an airport. And there were so many people there, and the competition was so intense. And so they were just really the perfect team. And I feel like I almost lucked out that, A, their coach was excited about it, and B, that the school would allow me to.
Well, I mean, doing what you did, I've done this work, and I can understand that the schools would be very hesitant, especially, Friday Night Lights. It's kind of warts and all. It's not like, we're just going to go in and write a book that your school publicist would have told. I mean, clearly, you talk about sex and drugs and, performance enhancement and not everything comes across, everyone does not come across as perfect citizen.
Absolutely not. And I just tried to tell the story as honestly and truthfully as I could and really just report what I saw unfolding and was hearing from people and do it as objectively as possible. And it takes such a brave person to allow someone into their life and say, write about me, and you can write about the negatives too. And there's conversations in the book that I'm sure were really hurtful for people to hear about what others were saying about them. And again, I'm just so thankful that they, every individual cheerleader sort of made that judgment call and allowed it. Because in addition to all those things, you see people being competitive. You see them in the moments where they're really angry and say something really nasty that they probably regret. I mean, it's like being in this book is like being on a reality television show. You really, and so much of the year is on the editing floor that it's the, it's the most, telling moments that are in the book, and those aren't always the pretty ones.
Were there any people who came to you after the book was published and said, oh, God, I wish that hadn't been in there. Can't you do something about it? I mean, were there any, regrets?
There were definitely regrets. No one said, I wish you could change this, because I actually put an email out to everyone in the book that said, if there is something that you do, take issue with factually or that, you really just don't want to print anymore, do tell me so that I could change it for another edition. But the responses I've gotten have been hugely varying. I got one email maybe 2 hours after the book had arrived in Memphis from one of the cheerleaders on that team, and she was like, thank God for you. This is the best gift anyone's ever given me. And I've had other people who were like, call me. We need to talk about this. And we sat down and talked for an hour, and they were really upset or hurt about a huge variety of things in the book. Some people took issue with physical descriptions I gave of them, that was what they really didn't like. Really, and some people said exactly what you said before. Thank you for showing us warts and all. And it's sort of surreal to have this almost documentation of everything that happened over a course of the year, from that meeting right before nationals where we're in, someone's hotel room, all piled into the room eating pizza and talking about what's going to happen tomorrow, to right afterwards when everyone's either elated or really hurt from what happened.
Do you think, now all I have to go on is your press picture, but to see that, I mean, you I don't know exactly how old you are. I don't think you're too old. I mean, you look like you could fit in with a group of cheerleaders. I mean, you're fresh-faced, you're young, and, maybe the schools, maybe the kids see you and they think, oh, well, look at her. She looks like one of us. What could she possibly say about us that could go wrong?
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that way. I do think I'm 28 now. I was 26 when I was on the road with the team, so I was older than them, but not adult or older than them, to put it that way. And there were so many times I was either at a game or at a practice or even at a party with some of the cheerleaders, and someone would come up and be like, oh, what's your major? Because I do look very, very young. So I think that definitely helped me in reporting, and I think it just helps you relate to someone to sort of be the same age. I think that I'm female was a really big thing in this book that, I think a guy sitting down to do a 4-hour in-depth interview with a cheerleader would have a completely different connotation than me doing it. As for looking like a cheerleader, it actually reminds me of a story where I was at the University of Memphis, and football is huge there. About 60,000 people go to a football game there. And just because of a ridiculous snafu between me and the coach, I didn't have a ticket to a sold-out game with the University of Tennessee. And so I'd gone to Memphis specifically for this game, and I was just thinking, how am I going to get into the game? And one of the cheerleaders was like, here, just put on my sweatshirt and just walk in with us. No one will notice. And I'm thinking, I am about 6 inches taller than any of you. I'm maybe 20 to 30 pounds heavier than the heaviest of you. I'm older. Of course, they're going to flag me. They're checking IDs of all the press people. I can see them with their flashlights doing these complicated checks on everyone coming into the arena. So I was like, well, you know what? I got nothing to lose. I got to try it. And I put the sweatshirt on, and I walked in, and I waved and sort of followed their lead of smiling and waving to everyone, and nobody noticed. So that was my first moment of, oh, yeah, no one outside can tell the difference. I can tell the difference. No one else can.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And were there any limitations on your access or what you were allowed to do and you know?
No, actually, I feel very blessed that everyone was sort of like, you can come to any practice, you can be at any activity, you can sort of report on anything. I think the only two limitations, and they were sort of things I worked out with people, was with if I was going to a party with a group of cheerleaders, which is something I did all the time just because I was on the road with them, and you know I wasn't enthused about sitting in my hotel room and watching TV all night. So the kind of deal I made with people is that if they said something I thought was really interesting and I wanted to use it, I'd just ask them the next day so that they could be totally open in whoever they are at the party. The only other restriction was at Stephen F. Austin University. They have this thing called LCLM, and it's almost like their fraternity letters. It's sort of almost like a secret society that everyone who's ever been a cheerleader at Stephen F. Austin University is a part of. And it's a very, very sacred thing for them. Cheerleaders in the book have tattoos of LCLM. It's on all their gear. Someone will say something in a practice when someone's being cranky or saying something nasty. They'll be like, that's not LCLM. And that's, you know, the highest form of get yourself in check right now. And so the only thing that was important to them was that I didn't go on their big 2 rituals for the year. They're 2 big, secret. Nobody who's not been in the club knows what they are rituals.
Oh. So that is something that you were not able to crash.
Yeah, I was not able to crash that. They said, no, we're sorry, but this is just for us. And I respect that. And I actually like how that came out in the writing, that there's something I don't know. I have no idea what those letters stand for at all. After spending a year on the road with these cheerleaders and then in the interceding 2 years that have happened, I still have no idea. And I like that. I like that there's something secret that's just for them.
You want to know, though, don't you?
I would love to know. If someone told me, I'd be sort of thrilled and also maybe a little disappointed.
So it's kind of the skull and bones of
it's the skull and bones of college cheerleading, absolutely.
Yuck. I don't know if I would want to know, or I know how reporters are. You want to know everything. You want to know all the details, and you want to decide for yourself. But at the same time, I don't know. Some things maybe we're better off just not knowing.
Exactly.
Yeah. What most surprised you in this? It was a year, right?
It was a year, yeah, from tryouts in April to nationals the next April.
So what most surprised you as you were doing interviews and reporting for the book, either about coaches or the cheerleaders or maybe people who followed them or just anything that really, surprised you about the whole process?
I think the biggest surprise was the people I met and who are in the book. I was sort of expecting a lot of blonde, girly girls, and that's just not who you get at all. So that was hugely surprising. The coaching actually was incredibly surprising. I sort of imagined cheerleading coaches being, cheerleaders themselves. Like, you can do it, rah, 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 sort of having that. No, they are brutal. That is like being in a room with a football coach or a basketball coach. They yell, they curse. It's in the pages of the book. They say mean things. They make you run stadiums. They are tough, absolutely. As for the sort of phenomenon I found most surprising, it was from day one till the last day of reporting shocking to me how cheerleaders relate to injuries. Like I said before, that everyone has been injured so many times, and it's just such a part of the sport, because either you're someone being tossed very high in the air, and there's a lot of danger there, or you're someone who's supposed to catch someone tossed in the air, and you have to catch them if they're flailing, if their knee is coming for your face. You just have to get under them to physically catch them, and that's also very dangerous. And over the course of my reporting, one of the main character in my book is doing a basket toss, which is this move where 4 people sort of grip hands and they throw you in the air, and you can go 25 or 30 feet in the air. They go very, very, very high. And then something happens on her way down where she sort of folds oddly, and she hit the mat. And being in a situation like that, she had to be rushed to the hospital. She had 2 fractures in her skull. She had a seizure. Is just absolutely shocking. And I think it is for everyone in cheerleading too, but I don't think there's any way to ever get used to that.
Yeah, as we've been talking, CNN moved the item that the actress Natasha Richardson was officially declared dead from her skiing injuries. And you think about, that was not to bring everybody down, but I mean, this is someone who got on skis on an easy, learner course, and whatever happened. You think about, forget about football injuries, but if you see the real cheerleaders doing it, either maybe at the sidelines on a college game or NFL, well, more of the college thing because they don't do the same thing with the NFL. But and then and I've caught once in a while the ESPN broadcasting the national competition. It looks incredibly dangerous, and I know I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and I remember last summer she came home and she had done, or maybe it was last year, she had done some cheerleading stuff, and she was telling us about being tossed in the air because she's one of the tinier kids, and we were just aghast, and we said, no way. It's just
right.
Not going to happen again. Sorry.
It is dangerous. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think without a doubt, it's nowhere near as dangerous as football. The basic stat is that in any given year, about 42 out of 1,000 football players will be injured. And for cheerleaders, that's only 6 out of every 1,000. So it's nowhere near as dangerous as football, but it is definitely dangerous, and without a doubt is the most dangerous sport that primarily attracts women, which I think is part of why I'm always seeing articles in the New York Times, in Time, in Newsweek, in basically every venue I can think of about just how dangerous cheerleading is. One other thing that I found pretty shocking in this book, kind of leading off this idea of injury, is that the risk is kind of part of the appeal to a lot of cheerleaders, especially the flyers, who are the tiniest women who get tossed very high in the air and top pyramids and top stunts. And I think one thing people really don't understand about cheerleaders is that these are thrill seekers. They're risk takers kind of by nature. And that's something that is very important to them that they feel a real rush from. And that's part of the experience. And so, while you want to say, don't do it or this is too dangerous, who's to say that's not your right to take that risk?
What do you think about parents that are encouraging their sons and daughters to do this? Do you think that they have a sense of the danger?
I think some parents are probably better informed than others. And if you're in one of these communities where someone has been seriously injured, or even if you've seen someone be not so seriously injured and just still seeing how dramatic a moment that is, I think you're a lot more aware than someone who's never sort of had that touch you or your gym. But again, I think women especially get a huge amount from cheerleading. And so I can't say I think that's a bad thing. If I had a daughter and she was interested in cheerleading, I'd definitely be nervous, and I definitely want to talk a lot about safety and just, how the human body isn't invincible. But I think ultimately I'd be like, okay, let's do it. I think it would be something I'd support.
Was there anything that you wish you hadn't found out about how all this happens?
Anything I wish I hadn't found out? There was one scene in the book where I was at a cheerleading camp, and these are camps that are sponsored by the big cheerleading organizations, and it's been a tradition since the 1950s that cheerleaders go to camp every summer, and they sort of learn cheers, and it's almost like a think tank where they sort of share the stunts they did all year and take safety tests and all that sort of thing. But there was one night at one of the cheer camps in Texas where they had like a dance contest, and I went to the dance contest just thinking, I'm hanging out with everyone. And it sort of turned into this weird sort of Girls Gone Wild moment, and I was sort of like, maybe I didn't want to know about this.
Wow. And I asked you, I made a comment before that was not very positive about cheerleaders as conversationalists. The stereotype of them, nonetheless, is that they are airheads, that they are spoiled, they're devoid of any socially redeeming features. Are you able at this point, or do you want to completely refute that stereotype? Or are there some that still do fit that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would refute this stereotype pretty strongly. And one kind of girl I'll give you as an example is someone I talked to on that first trip to college cheerleading nationals, and she was a senior in high school, and she was trying to figure out what school to go to, and she had a perfect score on her SATs, and she'd been accepted by several Ivy League colleges, and she was waiting to hear if she got into either University of Louisville or University of Kentucky, because if she got in there, she wanted to go for cheerleading rather than to Yale, which she got into. To someone outside cheerleading, sounds kind of crazy, but to her, that was sort of very important. There are many people in this book who are very, very, very intelligent, and intelligent in different ways, you know. There are artists, there are people who I think are really socially intelligent where they read things. And I almost think it's a shame because that stereotype is so kind of ingrained in our culture, and I think we put a lot of meaning on cheerleaders as sort of the stock character in high school who's popular and kind of has it all but is really missing the intelligence aspect. And there's actually a reason for that stereotype. Originally, cheerleaders were guys, and they were elected by their student body. And that went on until kind of World War II area when women sort of took over cheerleading. So there is a reason it is tied to popularity.
And, okay, all right, so they are interesting people. I will think of them.
Yes, believe it. I promise you. Very interesting people.
All right. I'll buy that for now. So tell me this: what is the difference between cheer squads from predominantly black schools and not predominantly black? I don't know how to describe the rest of the schools, but there are predominantly African American schools in the United States. What are the differences between the two when it comes to cheering?
Well, traditionally, the difference has been mainly in the dancing, whereas cheerleading dancing for kind of, I don't want to call it white cheerleading because it's not very white anymore. There's people who, in my book, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Iranian, you know, half and half. Just so many different types of people do cheerleading at this point. But in mainstream cheerleading, the dancing is almost not like dancing. It's very straight arm. It's very upright body. It's very sort of mechanical motions. And I think that's where historically black colleges have really stepped in and taken cheerleading in a different direction, where it's much more like dancing you'd see in a club or that you'd see people actually do if they were trying to dance versus kind of this very upright, systematic sort of cheerleading. So I think that's the big difference. At one point in time, you would say that historically black college squads would be much less about stunning, but that's actually changing extremely, extremely rapidly. And I think at this point isn't a difference. You'll see very often that both types of squads will really do a lot of stunts. They'll do a lot of huge pyramids. They'll do a lot of tumbling, too. Until pretty recently, there was a separate black college nationals where a lot of the historically black college teams would go. And unfortunately, that was sort of disbanded in the early 2000s, just a money thing. They weren't making a lot of money, so it sort of went the way of the dinosaur. And sort of the consequence is that a lot of those teams haven't been able to go to mainstream competitions because the mainstream competitions cost so much. And
go ahead.
And one of the teams in my book is Southern University, and they're from Baton Rouge. It's one of the biggest historically black colleges in the country, and they have amazing cheerleaders. In 2002, right after Black College Nationals was disbanded, they went to Nationals in Daytona Beach, where they came in second, and they actually beat Stephen F. Austin, which is the cheerleading machine team in my book, and they were just a few hundredths of a point away from winning, which would have been kind of historic. However, they didn't. They had one little problem in their routine, and so they came in second. And ever since, they've just been trying to raise the money to go back.
So, I mean, should we feel that it's an uneven floor for predominantly black colleges to participate in this? You would think that they would do pretty well. I mean, if anyone's ever seen the Florida A&M Rattlers, for example, who've been showcased, that's the marching band, but nonetheless you get the sense that a lot of those kids could do cheering just as well. Or is it not a point? I mean, do the other universities, are there black and white students represented in the other schools, or are they predominantly white
squads?
Oh,
yeah. I mean, at nationals, you will see a lot of people who are not white. Absolutely. I don't know if it's 50-50 at this point, but it's definitely every year getting a little better. This isn't a white girl sport anymore. And like I said, there's also a lot of guys in the mix. As for going to nationals, you see every time at nationals you'll probably see maybe 4 or 5 historically black college teams. You won't see a lot. And, maybe that's a money situation. Maybe that's a priority situation. Maybe it's not as important for a team to go to nationals. And you'll even see kind of an uneven playing field between schools because one of the teams, I'll call it a quote-unquote white team, it's not, but has a cheerleading budget of $100,000 a year. And the other team in my book has a budget of $30,000 a year. So even that is sort of an uneven playing field. If you have the money to put into something, you can give better scholarships. You can get better equipment. You can make sure you can send 25 teammates to nationals instead of just the 20 another team might be able to afford to send.
And what about the difference between co-ed teams and all-girl teams, squads?
Yeah. So kind of the breakdown is that college teams have traditionally been co-ed, where you have guys and girls. The guys are enormous, and the women are traditionally tiny, and they sort of throw them about like rag dolls. And then the high school model of cheerleading has traditionally been all-girl, where you have stunts that are based by 2 or 3 women, sort of each holding a foot. And all-girl teams in college are sometimes kind of looked down on, I'd say. Like that's sort of thought of as, oh, that's so high school. And they kind of sometimes don't get the same respect. And I think that also is something we're seeing rapidly changing. And that was one of the reasons I was really drawn to covering University of Memphis's all-girl team, because they're one of the teams that's saying, okay, sure, we only have women on our team. We don't have the insane lifting powers of guys. But you know what? We're going to try doing our stunts with 1 flyer and 1 base anyway and just see what happens. And a lot of times they're able to do it. And, as a very strong feminist myself, that's really exciting to see. It's sort of like, yeah, you can do it. So that was a really fun team for me to watch because they're sort of fighting for this respect that they haven't necessarily always gotten.
Just from your own aesthetic view, which do you prefer to see, co-ed or all girls?
I like to see co-ed because you can do so much and you can really innovate in so many ways. And I like to watch all girls to see them keep up with co-ed. It's almost
Fair
like
enough.
2 things I like to see in a way.
And what are the cons of cheerleading? And I'm guessing, for the cheerleaders, they start with peer pressure to not eat, so they stay tiny, maybe to take steroids or other performance-enhancing drugs. What are the cons of being involved in this for the kids?
I think you hit it on the nose. I think this is, I'm going to say a sport, but a lot of people would say it's an activity. But whatever you call it, looking good is part of the job requirement. And I think that's where a lot of sort of the negativity comes in. And kind of this focus on being, for women especially, of being so small and so thin and so toned, I think just puts a huge amount of pressure on people who are in a time in their life where that's probably changing pretty rapidly for them. So I think that definitely is a negative. And people in the cheerleading world have kind of gotten really used to watching out for eating disorders. That's something they've sort of known about for a while and sort of realizing that was happening for a while. So it's pretty common to see a coach pull someone aside and want to talk to them and want to, set them up with a counselor or a nutritionist or something like that to get them better on track. What I don't think coaches are as good as noticing is how much diet pill popping goes on these teams. It's a lot, and sometimes it's pretty mind-staggering. And if it's FDA, none of this stuff goes through FDA approval. So I don't like seeing people taking anything that I don't know exactly what it's going to do to their body. And when you have a sport that's largely unregulated, people will go to pretty far extremes that if they thought there was any chance of it getting caught in a drug test, they wouldn't do. For example, there's one girl in my book who comes clean that for about a year of her life, the way she stayed tiny for cheerleading was she was doing tons of cocaine, which is pretty shocking. And for her, it was all about the cheerleading. She said to me point blank, I wasn't addicted to the cocaine. I was addicted to the attention I got from being, the thinnest, prettiest, most energetic girl. And that's something pretty shocking. And I decided to include it in the book because it was ultimately a redemption story that she sort of came back from that, and it took a long time. But that's a pretty extreme to go to, and coaches should be aware that that's something that might be happening when they're cheerleaders, to sort of watch out for those signs. And it's also the guys who feel the body pressure. When you have this aesthetic of really tiny women and really big guys, some of the guys in my book were telling me it's considered embarrassing to weigh less than 200 pounds if you're a guy cheerleader. And that's where I think a lot of the steroid use comes in, is that people want to be bigger, stronger, faster, quicker. And anytime you're not testing people to that or explicitly saying, don't do this, I think it does open the door a little bit. People will do it if it's illegal and you say don't do it and you could have horrible consequences anyway. They'll still do it. So imagine what they'll do when it's something you don't address.
Don't you think, I mean, you mentioned about the coaches that maybe they don't see or deal with. Don't they pretty much know what's going on? They know, I mean, they know what these kids can be doing. I mean, my sense is whether it be cheerleading or football or basketball, they know what's out there. They know what's going on, but they, you know, maybe a lot of them, I won't say all of them, but they kind of turn a knowing eye away, and they, you know, don't ask, don't tell.
I think it's sort of impossible to know. None of the coaches I talked to ever willfully knew of something that they didn't address. But, you know, it's hard to know what people know. There's also kind of two types of cheerleading coaches too. There are people who are recent cheerleaders. So you'll see a lot of coaches who are in their young 20s, and they were just on the team themselves, and now they're a coach. I think it's pretty likely they probably have ideas about what's going on. But then there's coaches who are in their 40s and have been coaching for 20 years, and might they be as in touch with it? I don't know. I think it just depends on the coach. And I did see pretty good coaching where people would reach out and say things, and so I don't want to, you know, all pin this on coaches, but I think it's even more of an awareness issue.
But certainly, yeah, as you say, I mean, the younger coaches, they know what's going on. They can't claim to be two generations or a generation removed, and I didn't know about that. But you know, if they've recently been, you know, playing the game, so to speak, they know what's going on. I mean, it's not really an excuse, right?
I just have no idea, and I just have no evidence that they do or don't. For example, when I was on the road with people aren't hugely forthcoming about these things, but you sort of hear things, and so to me it's important to ask someone point blank, like, is this going on? And sometimes the answer would be no, which who knows if that's actually yes, and sometimes it'd be like, sure, I'm fine talking about this. So it just really runs a gamut.
I imagine some of the people who would talk about that would not want their names attached, but might be willing to talk.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true. And, you know, for me, that was a hard call. I only I think it was down to, in the final book, one person kind of go without a name, just because to me it's important that you could look up on Facebook and be able to find the person and talk to them if you wanted to.
Now, other than you know, like the NFL or the NBA, I mean, what future is there for a college graduate who spent most of their college years cheering? I mean, is there anything they can do with it besides train other cheerleaders? Oh,
this is such a huge thing. In cheer, all the cheerleaders constantly talk about the real world and sort of this real trepidation about graduating that I don't remember from my own college experience, this real kind of fear of being done with it. And I think what a lot of that boils down to is that there really isn't a next level, that graduating college for them really means being done with cheerleading. And for some people, this is something they've done since they were 4, that they, you know, have just become hugely passionate about. And what do they do after? They do everything. Some of the people in my book are now teachers. Some now work for pharmaceutical companies. Some now, you know, work for a paper company, or they're nurses. They do a huge variety of things. A lot of them do still coach, definitely. And one thing I actually am starting to see much, much more often is a lot of NBA teams and one NFL team, the Ravens, have actually started stunning cheerleading squads. That's something that we're starting to see really, really take off. And so that sort of does give people another level where they can have a job by day and then go cheer for their local team at night and make maybe, you know, $100 a game. So it's something. And one other thing I do kind of want to say on that question that was also sort of shocking for me is, okay, these cheerleaders, they're recruited out of high school. They get scholarships. Sometimes they get full rides. And it's not an NCAA sport, so there's no 4-year eligibility requirement. A lot of these people stay in school for 5 or 6 years. There's many people in cheer who are in college for their 7th year cheerleading, and there's one guy in the book who's actually in college for his 8th year as a college cheerleader.
Wow.
Yeah. So they stick around. I mean, I think it's a real fear of being done and having to give up cheerleading.
That's scary.
It's interesting. I would never do it, but then again, I had to pay for school. So my parents were like, no, you're done.
Exactly.
And, the good part of that is many of them do get masters. There's one girl in my book, Callie, who got an offer to cheer for Hawaii Pacific University when she graduated. And so she said, okay, I'm going to go get my master's in what? I'm not quite sure, but I'll figure it out. So some people do actually get higher degrees from this, too.
Wow. Now, you mentioned that several American presidents were cheerleaders, including Reagan and George W. Bush. But isn't that an indictment in and of itself of cheerleading?
An indictment? Oh, I see what you're saying. I think, and it's not even just those guys. It's just a huge number of people who are sort of in power in our society are former cheerleaders. And I think that's really, really, really interesting. It makes sense because to be a cheerleader, you have to be upbeat. You have to be, like I said, there was this old voting model. So I'm sure Ronald Reagan, for example, was voted to be a cheerleader. So you have this sort of popularity thing. And you also have this sort of desire to talk to people and be seen and be very public and be sort of, a leader in this one specific way. So it almost makes sense that sort of converts to some sort of power thing.
Scary. I don't know. Interesting.
FDR was a former cheerleader, so there are some great Democratic presidents who were cheerleaders too.
Yeah, but in the last couple of months, there's been a lot of people trying to say the book is still out on him.
Well,
I don't know.
True.
I'm not so sure. Now, what about best and worst movie portrayals of cheerleaders? I'm thinking Animal House myself.
I don't even remember the cheerleaders in Animal House. I mean, the best to me is Bring It On. And is it goofy? Is it comedy? Does it get a few things wrong? Absolutely. But I think it really gets sort of the energy of cheerleading and sort of the passion of cheerleading. So I think that's a huge thing. And it's interesting because since Bring It On came out, cheerleading has exploded even more. So I think that movie actually fueled a new generation of cheerleaders and is sort of going more in that competitive direction because of that movie. Worst. What is the worst representation? Maybe that one, what was it, Sugar and Spice, where they robbed the banks. The cheerleaders robbed the banks together. I definitely watched it, and I thought it was pretty terrible. but it's sort of a funny representation.
Are you able to, I guess, the paperback edition of your book, Cheer, which I haven't mentioned enough, Cheer, Inside the Secret World of College Cheerleaders, is just out, so I'm sure you're not ready to separate yourself from all this, but, day to day, are you looking for news stories about cheerleaders, and, are you Googling, are you doing Google News alerts for cheerleaders? Hello? Where did you go? We seem to have lost Kate. I will, let's just keep going here for a second. Hopefully Kate will call back up. There she is.
Hi, sorry about that.
Hey, Kate. Oh,
something
that's all
strange happened.
Oh, sorry about that. Who knows? So I was asking if do you do Google News alerts on cheerleading? Are you looking for all the latest news on cheerleading to stay on top of this, or are you ready to move on from it?
I still keep on top of everything. I don't think I'd write about cheerleading again. I sort of feel like that, for me, is done, and I kind of told the story I want to tell. But I do keep up, and there's actually a really interesting piece of news, probably a little more interesting to someone in the cheerleading world, but there was a case in Wisconsin just a couple of weeks ago where a girl had been dropped during a stunt and was injured cheerleading, and she was suing her school. So kind of the thing in question is this a sport, and is this a contact sport? Because if it's a contact sport, she cannot sue because that was sort of risk she took on her own. That's the general thinking. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court, in their opinion, said that, yes, cheerleading is not only a sport, but it is a contact sport, and that, sort of everyone in it has this awareness. that they are doing something risky. And so a school and a coach are not thereby responsible, which is interesting.
So the bigger danger to them is still reporters as opposed to...
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Well, now, before and since publication of Cheer, I want to get in a mention of this. You've worked as a freelance writer and editor, and I've noticed that some of your most recent published stories have titles such as Chickenpox Parties, Beauty Tools, Plucked from the Produce Aisle, and Why Do the Mentally Ill Die Younger? So what's next?
Wow, I'm always looking for what's next. So we'll find out, I guess. But yeah,
not dull stuff.
What did you say?
I said not dull stuff.
Yeah, not at all. I'm always looking for a great subculture to write about, or a great person to profile, or a great phenomenon I'm noticing. I'm just always trying to find it.
Any other books in the works?
I hope so. Eventually. It's hard because when you do a book like this, and I would definitely want to kind of do this again where I'm following something and I get to write a narrative versus a nonfiction book by topic. I think this was just so much fun, and it was an amazing year in my life that I will always remember because it just took me completely out of my own New York media life and plunked me down in these places I just never would have been. So I definitely want to do it again, but you have to, something really has to get its hooks in you because you report for a year and then you write for 6 months and then you spend the next 2 years kind of still talking about it all the time. And I'm still, as you can tell, very excited to talk about cheerleading, and I need a topic that I can be with for 4 years and still be really excited about it.
I'll tell you what, I think it'd be interesting 10 years from now to go back and catch up with a lot of these men and women that you wrote about in this book and do a follow-up, kind of like whatever happened to class of 65.
I would love to do that and do a postscript of some sort, yeah.
It would be very interesting to see how their lives turn out and, where because, it's going to be a mixed bag. There's going to be some that will have very good things that will have come from this and some that will be, living under a bridge somewhere.
And I know that's true. So I wish everyone well, though.
Well, put me down for a copy of that if you do that book.
Okay.
So, folks, you can order Kate Torgovnick's book, Cheer, Inside the Secret World of College Cheerleaders, at great bookstores everywhere or online at MR Mrmedia.com. And check out her website, www.cheerthebook.com. That's solid, cheer, CHEER, thebook.com, for more information and to keep up with what's going on with her and cheerleaders. And Kate, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It was a very entertaining interview.
Thank you.
And good luck.
You too, definitely.
Thanks, Kate.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And folks, for more nonfiction author-related interviews, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my earlier conversations with Legs McNeil, A.J. Jacobs, Guy Kawasaki, Mike Edison, Larry Ratso-Sloman, Roger Bennett, Peter Gollenbach, and many more. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, Pointer Online, MySpace, Vox, Digital Journal, Podcast Pickle, Folio, Mediafly, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, or Odeo. And subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@andelman.com. That's ANDELMAN. You can also follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, www.twitter.com/Andelman. Thanks so much for joining us today. I always appreciate when you give up a little piece of your day and spend it with us. Come back real soon, everybody. Thanks for listening.